Hello, everybody. My name is Carl Flowers. I'm the Technical Director of Authenticae Limited in the UK. I'd like to thank you for giving me a chance to talk to you all today, and I apologize that I couldn't be there in person to speak to you all. What I would like to do today is like to present the results from some biodegradability, disintegration, and plant response work that we've been doing on leather. Some of these results you would have seen last year if you attended the Filk conference, but I would also like to add to those results that we showed you last year and give you some insights into what is going to be coming out in the paper that we hope to be publishing shortly. So let's have a look at the data. Just pull this up. Okie dokie. So this work is very similar to the Filk studies that Authenticae and Filk did and uses very similar materials. There are a few extra additions that I'll come to just down below. So what we were looking here is we were looking at specifically the biodegradation and the degradation of alternative materials to leather and how they responded in end-of-life scenario, and how they compared to leather. The results that I published at the Filk conference last year, we were looking at the alternatives and comparing them to shoe upper leather. This work is going to expand that to show you a little bit about the types of tannages and how the different types of leathers tanned according to different methods will respond in an end-of-life composting scenario. And we expanded the work to have a look at some of the ecotox aspects of that biodegradation or degradation. So as I say, it adds to previous data that we've presented previously, and it's hoping to come out in publication that is due to be coming out shortly. We wanted to have a look at chromium versus veg tan versus chromium-free leather, and some of this is mimicked in the recent publication in World Leather. The materials that we used, you can see there on the right. It consisted of Noani, kombucha, teak leaf, snap pap, deserto, apple skin, Pinatex, a PUR-coated textile, a mycelium muskin material, a chrome tan shoe upper leather, and 3 intermediates. So that is leather tanned with wet blue, tanned as wet blue, tanned as chromium-free, and tanned as vegetable tanned intermediate. The study couldn't source Vigea to be able to mimic what was done in the original Filk study. The tests that we are going to show you the results for are what we call ISO 20200, a modification of the plastics disintegration test. We'll be talking a little bit about that first up. Then we'll follow that by some conversations about ISO 20136, a biodegradability test, followed by ecotox, is specifically the plant response test, which looks at phytotoxicity, and ecotoxicity, a chemical screening of the compost to look for forbidden compounds. And I'll expand on each of those methods as we go through. So ISO 20200, you can see a picture of the leather pieces. This is typical of what we see when we do vegetable tanned, condensed tannin disintegrations. Inside the sawdust, you can see the pieces. They go hard, almost like Bakelite. They sound glass-like, and they resemble this kind of appearance. These materials are kept in the incubators or in hot compost at 58 degrees Celsius for at least 90 days. But this particular test was expanded to the full 180 days that the test allows. What you're trying to look for here is the disintegration of the pieces, hopefully by the compost. And if your material disintegrates, you really have an indication that the material is going to perform well in composting end of life. So Noani, you may not be familiar with this particular material. It's a composite material, a range of polymers glued together, commonly used to try and emulate leather goods like the belt that you can see up the top there. This particular material consists of 3 layers, a very rubber-like layer, a middle insert, and then a soft surface coating, very polymeric. Kombucha, bacterial cellulose. These materials are very, very good for biodegradation. They are basically just untanned, unmodified bacterial cellulose, a little bit prone to water. these materials are pretty much as natural as they come. And of course, you expect them to do quite well in the end of life. At the bottom, you can actually see with these materials breaking down quite significantly with actual mold growing on them. SnapPap, a cellulosic material, paper-based, composited together. You can see that like all celluloses, they will ultimately biodegrade, but you can see on the right-hand side there that they didn't disintegrate completely. The results you'll see in a second. So paper-based materials to emulate leather, not going to do pretty well in normal composting within 90 days for the reasons that I'll talk about in a second. Deserta, you know well, cactus leather, what they call cactus leather, in terms of PU with a small smattering of cactus thrown in to try and emulate the leather material, but plastic polyurethane, as you know. Pinatex, pineapple fibers, again, cellulosic in nature. They tend to be quite slow biodegraders, disintegrators. This particular material comes from the Hugo Boss shoe, and you can see by the end of the test, still quite intact, no breakdown, no significant breakdown in this particular material. Muskin, mycelium material, common type of material on the market at the moment to emulate leather. Surprisingly, did not biodegrade very well. You can see at the bottom right, at the end of the first 90 days, largely left intact. The material did not break down. I'll give you the exact numbers of the breakdowns in a second. Strangely enough, this material didn't break down. A lot of these mycelium manufacturers like to place vegetable tans into the material to give it a nice warm feel and smell, and that could have contributed to its slow breakdown. Obviously, polyurethane coated textiles not going to do well in this kind of testing. You can see in the composts largely untouched coming out the other side at the full 180-day mark, pretty much looking like it did there at the end of the thermophilic 90 days. This is the chromium tan shoe upper material, full retannage, dyed, and fat liquid, went into the disintegration process. You can see a range of disintegrations on the right-hand side. You can see in the data just now, it had quite a large standard deviation, indicating the variance of the types of breakdown on this particular material were quite wide. This is typical of what we see in some chromium tan leathers, quite a wide range of disintegration, very difficult to reproduce this kind of test, especially if it's got quite a heavy vegetable tan retannage. So this is the results after the first 180 days. You can see that the top biodegrader in this particular disintegration test, 180 days in breakdown, was of course the kombucha, 100% disintegrated. You could also argue that the chromium-free was right up there, 100% as well. So tie first place for chromium-free leather intermediate, together with a kombucha intermediate. Sorry, kombucha full material. And then you can see the numbers decreasing in breakdown as you go through the materials from quite the natural materials identified by Gustavo Defau in his Ars Tinctoria work, and having a look at the worst performing, obviously the PUR coated textile with only 0.78% breakdown out of a total of 100% possible breakdown. So terrible results in terms of the highly plastic materials, and of course the leathers doing quite well in the top 5 or 6. Together with some of the more natural cellulosic materials also doing quite well in that particular regard. Now, how does this figure out in terms of what's going to take place in end-of-life testing? Well, of course, composting is going to expect the material to break down within 3 months, and these kinds of results indicate to you which kinds of materials they will accept and which kinds of materials they will not accept. ISO 2136, this measures how much carbon dioxide is evolved by the material over the course of its duration. It's a 28-day test. So what we do is we place the material into a bacterial soup, allow the bacteria to ferment for 28 days. We supply it with CO2-free air and make sure that we monitor what CO2 comes out. We are trying to see if the carbon in the material can be converted to carbon dioxide that we can then measure. So this is the typical type of test that we will perform to look for ultimate biodegradation. So you can see the material is ground up on the left-hand side there, connected to a CO2 detector on the right. It might not be that visible to you. The bacterial soups look like what it looks like at the bottom left, and the material is connected in a constant environment room to the reactors and are monitored for the 28 days for how much CO2 is evolved. This is the typical type of graph. I haven't included all of the curves that we did for the test. You can see the details of this in the full paper. I just showed the slow biodegraders and the slow biodegraders. The purple, blue, and orange are what we would call rapid biodegraders. And you can see that was the kombucha, which actually had a biodegradation rate higher than the collagen control. The control itself, and of course, the orange is our chrome-free intermediate, which had a very rapid biodegradation. This is one of the things that makes us very positive when it comes to end-of-life scenarios, knowing that our new generation chrome-free leathers and even some of our older chrome-free generations like the glutaraldehyde chrome-frees have a very, very fast biodegradation, allowing us to perform well in compostability certifications, which I'll come on to in a little second. You can see that the PU-coated material hardly got off the baseline. And of course, the Pinatex was sort of a medium, somewhat slow biodegrader. This is the table showing the range of numbers of the biodegraders. You can see, as we could expect, quite natural substances, largely unmonitored, were good. You'll see two columns: an absolute breakdown and a relative breakdown. This is because what we do is we correct for what would take place within a 6-month window. So those are the two numbers that you're expecting there. I like to look at the absolute disintegration to see what took place in 28 days. And you can see there's a range of numbers there, from doing very badly in the case of the PUR-coated textile, all the way through to quite high percentages when it comes to the kombucha, and of course the chrome-free intermediate, 85% and 65% respectively. So some really good range of breakdowns. I haven't been speaking about the vegetable tanned material. They don't do well in disintegration and in biodegradation, particularly the condensed tannin type, but we'll talk a little bit more about those in a second. Now, if we are making compost, what is that going to be like if you had to put it onto horticultural or agricultural land? So if you want to use it as a homeowner or as a farmer, would there be any problems with contamination? Well, of course, we know that we are battling restricted substances in the industry, and we have to screen. We have to understand what the composts coming from leather will be like. Particularly for those of you from Italy, you will know that composting and fertilizers are tightly controlled. Germany, the same. They have very strict controls over what can be placed onto soil, because lessons were learned previously when people were trying to place things like tannery sludges, tannery effluents, or even tannery waste onto land previously. So there are layers of certification and layers of testing that the waste management industry will be expected to go through if we are ever to get leather wastes going on to agricultural land. So these tests are quite important. What influence do they have over plants? And here you can see the screening that we did over chrome tanned intermediate composts where we grew tomato plants on the left-hand side, chromium-free plants on the right-hand side, composts, plants grown in chromium-free composts on the right-hand side. And down the bottom, you can see some very good results that we got when plants were grown in composts made out of vegetable tanned leather. Now, this tells you a lot. This tells you an incredible amount as to what plants like and what they don't like. So, for example, you would not be surprised to see that the chromium tanned composts did not allow the plants to flourish. We had a 78.7% growth mass compared to the blank plants that had no materials in the composts that they were grown in. And so we would not be able to pass compost certification using a chromium tanned compost using these plant response tests. They expect at least 90% of the blank growth if you wanted to be able to pass this plant response test. On the right-hand side, the chromium-free leathers did grow more than the blanks, and that would be a very good result in terms of the ecotoxicity if somebody was screening plants grown in a chromium-free compost. So absolutely no problems with the plants, no deformations, good plant growth, higher than what we would expect, and of course, a very favorable material that could be placed onto an agricultural land. Now, the bottom, the vegetable tanned, grew 174% more than the blanks. And that indicates that if you did make a compost out of vegetable tan, it might not biodegrade and disintegrate as well as what the other materials would disintegrate. But if you had to take that compost and place it into agricultural land and grow your tomato plants in it, you could be expecting a bioenhancement of that plant to the magnitude that we see here, 174% more than the plants grown in normal blank with no material in it. Now, of course, we did a full ecotox screen, and here you can see the tables of that. For the 3 leather intermediates that we did, you can see that we looked for the range of metals. We also looked for chlorinated hydrocarbons. We looked at phthalate esters. There's a long list of 200 chemicals that we screened for. Most of them came up negative. The only positive results are what I'm showing in this table over here. You can see the controls on the second to left column, the chromium-free in the middle, vegetable tanned and chrome tanned detection of ecotoxins on the right-hand side. Very clean sheet, nothing to be concerned over here. The control levels were not largely different from the chrome-free veg tanned and chrome tanned leather, except for the presence of chromium. And you can see that we had at least 5,500 parts per million of chromium in these composts as a result of chrome tanned leathers being broken down. That would not be allowed to go onto any agricultural soils in the EU, US, and many other parts of the world. And so in terms of chromium-based composts, chromium tanned leather going into composts, this would immediately be restricted and not be allowed to go out onto agricultural or horticultural land. So this is quite a good indication as to if you just look at the tannages directly, there's not a lot to worry in terms of the ecotoxicity. Of course, if you start adding finishes and post-tan chemistry on there, that's going to make a big difference in terms of what kind of ecotoxicity you can expect. And this is the reason why we screen each batch of material, each batch of compost made from certain types of tannages. So in conclusion, I would just like to say that what we did was we compared different materials against new alternative materials to leather, against types of leather, a chromium tan shoe upper leather, which had full post-tannage treatment done to it, and also the leather intermediates, the vegetable tanned, the chrome-free, and the chromium. They all did quite well in disintegration and biodegradation to varying degrees. As we said, as you start to put more vegetable tan, condensed vegetable tans in, you start to see a decrease in disintegration. The kombucha, the Pinatex, and the Snap Pat disintegrated with similar rates to leather. They are largely cellulosic. You'd expect them as natural materials to break down quite well. They don't break down as fast as leather, though. And so this is a unique opportunity for the leather industry to market itself. Now, of course, not all leathers are going to perform like this. Each leather has to be tested individually. Each type of formulation has to be looked at quite carefully. But that is what this kind of work is going to show. It depended on the tannage and the retannage, of course. Other alternatives did poorly in the end-of-life testing, as we've shown in this particular work. We did get very favorable end-of-life ecotoxicity, especially in plant response test of the veg tan. And what we can note with positivity going forward is that leather, enhanced for its biodegradability, can certainly lead the material field as the material of choice going forward. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to answering any questions by email or if you come and see me personally at the fair. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your meeting.